Have you ever heard of William Wilberforce? The three great Brits that I say brought the kingdom of God into the UK, Whitfield, Wilberforce, and William Booth. I guess the last name would be Booth. Anyway, Wilberforce was probably the most significant of the three for this reason. He didn't do what he did as a preacher. He did it as a member of Parliament. He shows how government can be a powerful force in changing history. He eradicated slavery, saved England from the flames, in a sense, of the destruction that could have spread over with the French Revolution. And he supported the ethical reformation of a nation to become Victorian England. One guy, and they said that when he died, you'll hear about this when I teach you, that they looked and his back was held up by a brutal iron brace that wrapped around his neck and around his waist with an iron band. And they thought, what pain this man must have been in because he had scoliosis and persevered his whole life in pain in spite of it and delivered transformation to a nation. Amazing story. And you know, when I look at how blessed we are nowadays to be alive when we are, because I hear the transformations that are happening in people's bodies, their health, because we live in a different age. And thank God for that. We're not dying in our 40s, 50s, and 60s. We're able to live longer. But are you living stronger? Are you living better? Just got one thought for you. You know, you hear me talk about level 10 matrix if you watch these programs at all. But I'm constantly getting the reports of what happens with actual stem cells. These are stem cells. It's almost like a fad. Everybody's into the field. These are actual stem cells coming from the umbilical cord of a healthy mother. Boom, when the birth is taking place, that's when the teeming with life, these cells go in and they start to multiply once they get into your body. I was just looking at my notes here. These umbilical cord delivered stem cells have these high cell counts. They're robust. Remember, they're forming life. So they're going into your body, in a sense, repairing, restoring, renewing. Your body starts to atrophy like that as you get older. And then, boom, it just kind of like it seeks out degeneration and activates your body's internal repair system. It's a proactive prevention focus, too. I mean, it's not something you do just because you got a problem. It's something you do because of the power of what it does to keep you strong. You stay younger, you're stronger, you last longer, improved energy, mobility. Just go and check it out. Go to level10matrix.com, 1-800-361-2270. You can get the book Stem Cells Made Simple. Understand why this is like the most elegant, refined, powerful delivery. So there's like a scale of the stem cell technology. Bam, this is what I call level 10, the top, which is why I call it level 10 matrix. All right, go to level10matrix.com, download the report, and see for yourself why this is making so many transformed lives amongst our brothers and sisters in the church right now. Now let's get into the world of William Wilberforce. So years ago, I remember asking the question, is there any strategy in history that can correspond to the United States of America, this once more Christian nation, recovering from its collapse? I mean, its moral spiral. And the answer was given to me. There's only one period of history that could really be instrumental in teaching us, and that would be the period of England. At the time of the French Revolution, the whole nation went up in anarchy. The fires of revolution were spreading, but they hit a water wall in Britain. And how could it be possible that the same, COVID goes around the world? Why wouldn't that same moral contagion of frustration with elites? Certainly Britain had their elites, they had their royalty, they had their poverty. Something in France, discombobulated, but over in Britain, it didn't take hold. And what was it? Well, it was the work of the first and second great, it was the Great Awakening that happened with Whitfield, the Methodist Church. It was the power of an evangelical sensibility that came into the nation. It was the strength of Wilberforce and the Reformation that he had brought. I've got the name here, William Wilberforce, for a reason. Because Wilberforce shows us a model of not only how to overcome the threats of socialist, progressive, left-wing, communist revolution, but what the structure and the strategies are that can save a nation. Remember, Old England is where we came from. New England is where I used to preach in the United States. New England. I mean, we're an offshoot of the British colonies and a fairly young nation as nations go that have been around, like Italy and the Roman conquests at the time of Christ. We're a young country compared to them. So there's something to learn about what did Wilberforce, what did Whitefield, what did Wesley, what did these guys do in Great Britain? And maybe what do they need to do now that they're in the spiral they're in? Well, here's where I want to go. Wilberforce rises up as a unique feature because he, at the same time that our country had slaves, Britain had been massively in the slave trade from the Caribbean and various parts of the world, Africa, where they would literally have the sugar plantations and be going and taking the slaves and bringing them to England and creating their whole system of their empire run off of this slavery market. Well, Wilberforce is the one who could be said to be credited with breaking that in history. How did Wilberforce do that? When we failed to deal with it, as I said in an earlier episode, we ended up going through a civil war because Christianity wasn't able to penetrate government and shift the conscience of the nation and move people to reject slavery in the South. We ended up having an armed conflict. Wilberforce's way is a lot better than civil war. So what did he do? Massive figure in history. When he died, I'll tease this out, in his 80s, they found him. He was a shriveled up kind of guy because he had scoliosis, spine bent over. And they were horrified to discover that all those years he had this back brace, almost like an iron claw, that went up his back, around his waist, and wrapped around the collar of his neck, which he kept concealed. And they kept him from completely tipping over. And so he was held up in this painful iron brace his whole life, but nobody saw it, nor did he complain about it. The one quote that I remember is a man in Parliament. Let me see if I can find his quote here, because I thought it was so interesting, that he said, I listened to Wilberforce speak, name is Boswell. He said he would come into Parliament and he approached it frail and small, bent over, but the shrimp became a whale and I was carried away by his eloquence and forgot that he was even small. He seemed to fill Parliament with the strength of what he had to say. Well, what was it that Wilberforce had to say? He says that God visited him. He visited him as a young man. His aunt and his uncle, his father died. Notice how these patterns in family history affect and shape you. His father died. He had to go live with his aunt and his uncle. But his aunt and his uncle were affected by the Whitefield, Wesley revivals. Whitefield, the great evangelist, George Whitefield, preached in their house and had meetings on their property. The place was packed. The family was so impacted by Whitefield, they were ardent believers, that by the time that young Wilberforce went to stay with Auntie, they really evangelized the heck out of that kid. Pray, you need Jesus. The kid evidently has an encounter with God. And he hasn't yet submitted himself, but he knows it's real. his mother thinks he's fallen into a cult and immediately reels him back home and tries to get him back with his old buddies, his old friends, and get back to normal, get away from the religious fanaticism, huh? Well, the thought didn't leave him because God began to wrestle with him. He goes on to Cambridge, becomes best friends with William Pitt, aristocratic, wealthy, young, future prime minister. And the two of them were buddies in college, best friends, and commiserated about what they were going to do with their political careers. And they both decided Pitt will be prime minister, he'll serve 2 terms, and he's going to set it up for William, so William Wilberforce, he can have his turn. And the two of them were actually going to go kind of play politics together and champion each other as buddies. Well, this is when Wilberforce gets dealt with by God. And God starts to convict him, and he gives his life to Jesus. And he says, man, I wanted to do politics. That was my ambition. But I realized God set before me not 1, but 2. Folks, listen to me. Not since Moses has there ever been a mandate this audacious given to an individual regarding a nation. Wilberforce was told by the Lord, 2 things, son, not just 1. I want you to abolish slavery completely. Get rid of it. Now imagine this. Back then, 10% of the GDP of the nation, 1/10 of the economy is off of this industry. And in the weird psychology of Europe, they thought they were helping people become more civilized by coming into Europe. So Wilberforce is going to eradicate slavery. Look at how we did it in the United States. See how big a job that was? And then the Lord adds this to him. And I want a complete reformation of morality, complete overhaul on the morals of the nation. If the morals were right, then the slavery wouldn't be an issue. So it's not just like, let's say, ending abortion, but I want you to take care of, deal with gay marriage and get everything back on a Christian foundation. That would be like God giving you that call right now. End abortion and gay marriage. Just do it. Oh, my gosh. God has set before me 2 great objectives: the abolition of the slave trade and the reformation of manners. Manners in that period of time meant morality, how people behaved. Do I have any more on him here? He says, you may choose to look the other way, but you can never say again that you didn't know. He had a real conviction about conscience. He says, once God speaks to you, once the Word of God shows you what the truth is, you cannot turn away from it. You're held to that standard. And so he practiced that vigilantly. Now, I want to talk to you about the strategy that was employed, because it didn't happen easily. Wesley was in his older years when young Whitefield wrote to him and said, hey, man, I think God wants me to overturn slavery. And Wesley said, basically, listen, I'm a man of faith, but I'm telling you, if God's not in it, it's not going to be happening in your lifetime. But if God's in it, it can happen. It'd have to be God. So you need to know this about Wilberforce, and that is the fact that God raised him up as a vessel to completely shift the nation. And the way that he would do it would be he would be working with the transformation of culture through the conviction of the conscience. He gathered together with other Christians in Parliament, and they joined forces together. They were derisively called the Saints by the rest of Parliament. But those Christians made the decision that they were going to do something that would affect the direction of the nation. It wouldn't happen overnight. Wesley was virtually almost right, because it was somewhat 40, 50 years later, Wilberforce is near his deathbed, and he gets handed a piece of paper saying, essentially, slavery will be eradicated. What you've given your life to, accomplishing, at the end of your life, you can see. It's like Moses looking at the promised land out there on the horizon. But what William Wilberforce had done was, In order to create a conscience in the nation, he began assailing every single ghastly, immoral practice they had. Young kids would be getting drunk. They were able to drink at the age of 7. He said, you got to raise the workforce age. You can't have kids working 14 hours a day in the mines, drinking gin when they come out. And so he started to create laws and push for moral reform and continuously pinprick the nation in 100 places. The Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. You know where that came from? Wilberforce watched a man beat his horse over the head with a club. He said, this is ghastly. Laws should be against the cruel treatment of animals. And so he basically made a conscience formed in the nation by legislation and constant public persuasion on the habits that they had. We'll come back in a minute. I want you to hear the rest of this. What if you could live younger and stronger for longer? Is it possible to reactivate your body's internal repair system the way God designed it? Are you or someone you love struggling with body degeneration and in search of some kind of an effective solution? At Level 10 Matrix, we believe that the power that created you can heal you, and that healing and regeneration are already encoded right inside your DNA. And whether it's due to injury or illness or aches or chronic pain or lack of energy, mental or physical decline, or the brain fog that seems to come with the aging process itself. If you want to revitalize your life now, then call 1-800-361-2270 or go to level10matrix.com now to claim your complimentary ebook and to schedule your complimentary no obligation, no pressure consultation. Remember, looking and feeling younger never gets old. So if you want to revitalize your life now, then call 1-800-361-2270 today. Some people ask about what are the characteristics of a Wilberforce. I'm going to give you a strategy for what he did, how he did it, the pinpricking of the conscience in 1,000 ways. Matter of fact, let me just go there right now. He could have been absorbed by the system, but he didn't. He really wanted to leave politics. He wanted to just get into being a preacher, a revivalist, kind of like Whitefield and Wesley, and just join the ranks of the clergy and teach and preach. But here's a lesson for some of you. The place that God's called you may not be the place you want to go, but it's the place where you'll ultimately have the greatest impact for the kingdom of God. Point being, Wilberforce met with John Newton, the slave trader. John Newton, the author of that hymn, Amazing Grace, wrote it because he himself was an unsaved, cussing sea captain who made money off of slaves. After he got saved, he considered the amazing grace of God and wrote, "To save a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see." He met with William Wilberforce. Wilberforce said, "I just can't stand politics. I hate the whole scene. I just want to focus on this slavery issue." And Newton said, "William, you're perfectly positioned in politics to make a difference. Guys like me, I'm out here in the church world, but you're in government. You could do something." And so that was the secret that moved him. In terms of the battle he had, he went on for 20, 30 years, just shot down, failure after failure after failure. But he persisted. He persisted in building a conscience in the culture. Now, this is something to think about. And we don't do this very well, but we ought to learn something from Wilberforce. Slavery was only one expression of the reformation of morality, reformation of manners, remember? Wilberforce's quote here is, "A true Christianity is a new principle of action within." That sounds a little vague, but to him, here's what it means. If you're really a Christian, you have a new heart, and it ought to spring out in manifesting new direction in your life. And what you put your hand to is an extension of a changed nature. If you really don't have any action out here that reflects a change of nature, you're probably not a true Christian. That's what he calls a true Christianity. So he said, listen, true Christians would engage with social ills. The left does this all the time. I think we Christians are kind of like slow at this because we got to pietism, mysticism. It's all about supernatural and getting saved and going to heaven and going to church. The left is like a counterfeit for the church. It's like they're into fighting this and fighting that, freedom by this. All their courses and curriculum, it's about the oppressed, the suppressed, the victims, the this, the that. And it's a misguided evangelical zeal, which is trying to, get rid of save the whales and, and then the hoot owl and, global warming and climate change and redistribution of wealth and stop the police and defund the police. All of that is like what happens when you don't have a healthy conscience working in a nation doing proper reform. You got radical, crazy reform. Wilberforce said, let's harness this baby. And so what he did was he got whole kinds of groups. They call them societies. And it'll be a society for the prevention of the cruelty of man, a society against drunk driving, drunkenness with minors, like 8-year-olds. I told you, like 11-year-olds would go mining 14 hours a day and go with their dad and go get drunk on gin. So there were child labor laws, he said. It used to be a public entertainment. You know what public entertainment in London was? They'd have a public hanging, especially women. Women being hung in public was like, you could be, and it was like a carnival, and guys were selling stuff. Get your popcorn here, 3 for $50. And it's like, here comes the hanging. And there comes Katie out there. Ooh, what's your crime? I want to see you hang. And you see her go up there and, get the thing around it. And it was a public, almost entertainment. Wilberforce said, this has got to stop. And he'd preach in Parliament, but he'd have his little societies. He's got his Methodists, he's got his evangelists, got his evangelicals, and they had lots of tracts. They were all handing out tracts to the literate, talking about this, and they're moral reformers. And that little army of his, listen to what they did. I think they initiated something like 120 different laws and reforms. Child labor reform. Children as young as 6 were drunk gin-soaked factories. That ended. Animal welfare. He founded the ASPCA. Prison reform. Education reform. He started the Sierra Leone and India, started sending missionaries out with missionary work from the nation. He ended public hangings and all forms of cruelty. And what happened is it gradually built a conscience. But more than that, he started meeting in private at the Clapham estate. Now, this is a place where he met. And he said, let me see if I could draw this for you. This is kind of a powerful idea. What Wilberforce did was he basically took, like I talk about these 7 mountains of culture, he said, we're going to deal with Great Britain and we're going to change the way it thinks. So he took the church influencers and he worked with his government people. Watch this. He worked with media people. He worked with the arts community, and he worked with business. Now check this out. What Wilberforce did with these 4 was amazing. He took them all, and they met at the house of a businessman. And so this is the family mountain, actually. And so he basically had the families come to the business mountain over here where they had a property, which was called the Clapham estate or the Clapham Fellowship. And they would go from London all the way, and he took the elite believers in media, in government, from the prominent families of influence in Great Britain and preachers. And they met here at the home of a wealthy businessman, and they gathered together there, and they fellowshipped over weekends. And during those weekends, they had meals together and discussed who they were influencing. Now, watch how this works. Who were they influencing at the top of the structures? Who were they talking to? And it was almost like evangelism. How's the conversation going? Because they all agreed that the slave trade was going to be the target they were going to take down. And in doing that, they would deal with all the other reforms, creating a conscience in culture till that big one came down. But you see how ingenious this is? The Clapham estate, in my opinion, is one of the great unused strategies of Christianity. What it means is Christians that are the elites or the people of influence that have prominence, visibility, influence, should actually be meeting together and in humility and before Jesus, praying about what is it you're calling us to do, Lord, and how can we use our agency in order to produce change and reform. This could be done in a city. This could be done in a region of the country. And in Great Britain, it was done in a nation. By the time they were done, get this. I'm going to change the color here just to make a point. I'm going to go to purple. Do you know what they produced as a result of that? Victorian England. You ever hear the word Victorian? And you think of some kind of a, proper British. The Victorian England came out as a result of Wilberforce shifting the morality of the nation and ending the slave trade. That little shrimp of a man that needed a neck brace to hold him up persisted for 20, 30, 40 years, being defeated. But gradually his reforms. And you know what he said was the secret? I want you to hear this language. A sustained pattern of public persuasion. Would to God we had that all of the Glenn Becks and the War Rooms and the Charlie Kirks, and in a sense, it's happening without coordination by people hearing and sharing the same ideas and articulating them in their own ways, but a sustained pattern of public persuasion. If we were saying and thinking and believing and beating the drums at the same time with the same strategy, how much more influence would there be rather than a cacophony of different drum beats going and everybody's clashing cymbals and kind of like getting everybody to pull in their direction? But if we could move together, this is what Wilberforce did. They had that, the government mountain was where they went and voted, but their public persuasion was what the elites were all working on at dinners in private. They did plays. They wrote books. The artists wrote award-winning books and did award-winning art projects that touched the high culture of the nation in order to put a conscience in them about the issue of slavery. All of them played their part. Now, listen, that's how homosexuality became like LGBTQ, got written into so many scripts. Annabelle and I watch Netflix. It's so frustrating because it takes 2 years for you to get something out of your system, because we're watching stuff that was put in during the Biden administration. So we're having to regurgitate all that, but it's always got a subplot with a trans this or two gay lovers, lesbian or something like that. It's like, hey, you're talking about 3 to 4% of the population. Forget about the Gen Zs. They all been, propagandized. 3% of the population. Why is it 50% of the cast members? But that's what happens. Wilberforce would go into the arts world and say, up, we're going to have some cool Christians. We're going to make Christianity cool. We're going to make righteousness cool. Because that's what the Reformation of manners was. Well, I'm sharing that with you because the lessons that we learned is, in 1807, the Slave Trade Act was passed. 283 votes against it, 16 to keep it. Parliament wept, Parliament applauded. Wilberforce wept silently, head bowed in gratitude. 3 days later, he went into glory, stood in front of Jesus. His death was, on his deathbed, he received word that the Slavery Abolition Act had passed. He finished his race the way he had fought, with perseverance, grit, grace, and he never complained about his personal price. All right, that's William Wilberforce, and I hope you've enjoyed the series thus far. There's a special relationship that a ministry has with the people that pray for it, support it, stand with it. And I've got a couple of hundred of you out there that I want to throw a party for. I got meals, party plans. Annabelle and I are going to be together. And I want to share with you the exciting inside story about the work that we're doing, work we do in partnership, organizations like Turning Point, like the White House Faith Council, and give you guys the insider update. What's interesting about this especially is, the meals, the resources, the whole event. We deliberately pared this thing down to the minimum cost possible, so it's only $350. I want you to be there. Go to lancewallnau.com/partner party. We'll see you there.
Did you enjoy this latest episode? Please remember to share it with your friends, because the more knowledge you have,